And welcome back to Coast. We are back with Harvey Kuberneck, author of many books, including Turn Up the Radio, Canyon of Dreams, Docs That Rock, Jimi Hendrix, Voodoo Child, and a number of others. He is an expert on the music world and is back with us on Coast to Coast. Hey, Harvey, how you been?
Doing great. Just always delighted to be invited to your program, and I know your listeners occasionally like to take a little departure from Area 51 to Harvey 51.
Exactly, and we're going to do that. You still out there on the West Coast?
I sure am.
I'm in St. Louis, but had I been back in Los Angeles, we would have had you physically in the studio.
Well, you know, I spent a lot of time going by your studio in Sherman Oaks, California. We'll do it in the future.
We will do that indeed. How did you get so involved in music, Harvey?
You know, it's a question I'm asked a lot. Part of it is geographically. You know, I'm a native of Los Angeles. I'm born literally in East Hollywood on the corner of like Sunset and Alvarado, overlooking the Hollywood 101 freeway at the Queen of Angels Hospital. And I start the journey there. And at the time, Los Angeles. And I don't think people really realize that, although I certainly detail it in my book, Turn Up the Radio. You know, there were many R&B radio stations in L.A. in the 50s, way into the 60s.
Sure.
There were jazz radio stations. There was so much music. It was a thriving, vibrant community. You know, sorry, folks, it all wasn't New York City and Chicago. And you're just inundated with even before the transistor radio arrived, it's just blaring in front of you. And then, you know, with my parents and my brother Kenneth, I end up, you know, leaving like downtown Los Angeles and Coliseum Street Elementary School and Crenshaw Village and Leimert Park, and I end up in Culver City right near MGM Studios, and somehow end up in West Hollywood going to high school all through the late 60s. So it's so in front of me, and, you know, maybe I've become this messenger and I mirror it out to other people as well. It's just been part of my DNA.
Good for you. Did you ever know our old friend who's passed away, R. Gary Patterson?
No. I know we have a mutual friend in the late Russ Regan, but I didn't know the other guy.
Yeah, he was good. He did a great job. He reminded me of you and just so excitable about the music scene and the world and stuff like that.
Well, it's been my salvation, you know. You know, we turn to music, you know, in happiness and in decision-making situations, just following, you know, the Beach Boys' God Only Knows. You know, I've been privileged to know Brian Wilson for half a century. I must have done 12 interviews with him, and I've been fortunate. I was able to say, Brian, what is it about God Only Knows? What is it? Why does it still impact 57 years after you did it? And he'd say something like, when I first did it, I was wondering, would radio ever play a song that had God in the title? and then here I am being greeted or following the declaration as you're using it as interstitial music. But think about him, you know, having concerns almost two-thirds of a century ago about a song title, as well as concerns about would the record label actually let the word God be, you know, in the package artwork and everything. We've come a long way, I think.
Yeah, we sure have. Well, let's have some fun talking about music. We'll take calls next hour as well, Harvey. And, you know, I'm a product of Detroit. I'm a Motown guy. I've seen it all in Motown, and they continue to do a great job. Berry Gordy's still kicking.
Oh, I was just at a Motown event a week ago when they honored Marvin Gaye in the 53rd anniversary of his album Let's Get It On.
That's
Smokey Robinson was on the panel at the Grammy Museum in L.A., and I spent some time with Smokey. I was just filmed for a documentary with Smokey, but I spent some time with him, and it became even more clear to me what the city of Detroit gave to all of us. Sure, we know about General Motors, and sure, I mean, people like you know about the Detroit Tigers or Al Kaline or you know what I'm
sure,
that, the
absolutely,
sports and all that world.
But the music scene, look out.
Well, even Smokey said on the panel about Detroit, and especially Motown, it could never happen again. And sure, it's a brand now, and Berry Gordy, who's 92 or 93, he's still involved. He's still involved emotionally and fiscally, but the music still continues, whether it be TV shows or soundtracks. And I mean, for somebody like you who was there with Casey Kasem or hearing it, like what the DJ's name was, like Robin Seymour back there, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you were ground floor watching something that really informed the world and brought us all closer together. And the music, it just, even in streaming platforms or even, you know, when you hear it, even in elevators or something, every time you hear a Motown recording, you discover something different about it. And it was our friend Russ Regan, who worked for Motown and Joe Bett, and was involved with, bringing Motown to the West Coast. He was a promo man and worked with Berry Gordy 60 to 63. He introduced the world to, like, Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes. Russ said he learned one thing from Berry: you can always smell the opening of a Motown record by the hooks you get brought into. It still connects.
It really does. We had Smokey Robinson on the show, the Coast to Coast program, several months ago, Harvey, and he was just wonderful.
Well, what was that like for you? It
was amazing.
That's your soul brother.
I try not to get so excitable like a kid, but deep down inside, it's there. I mean,
listen, I've done interviews with him. I just did a documentary I filmed with him. I've seen him in markets. And then I said, Smoke, I need about 30 seconds with you. I've got to ask you a question. He said, no. What do you need, man? What do you need? And I just said, that song, Tears of a Clown.
Yep.
And I just said, when I heard that when I was, 17 or 18, I never heard somebody reference and use the term Pagliacci in the song lyric, clown. And he just laughed and he said, well, why didn't you get a thesaurus and look it up?
He was classic.
He's
he really
beautiful.
And he's touring now.
He's playing. He had COVID a while ago, but he's rebooked a bunch of dates and he's working into next year. And he's featured in a wonderful documentary that's currently broadcast on Showtime TV called Hitsville, The Making of Motown. And it's just so fantastic to hear him discuss songs and songwritings. And, I know, Barry always said Smokey is the guy because Barry started as a songwriter. But Smokey, the wisdom of the songs, the direction you take from the lyrics, and he had a lot of co-writers and people who worked with him. But, you were there ground floor hearing Shop Around and hearing these seminal audio sonic gems that changed the world. But you in Detroit, who sings and understands music, it must be amazing for you as you see how Motown expanded globally. Because to somebody like you, it's something on WKLCW or whatever that station was over there. Look how it spread.
WKNR.
Yes.
Bob Green was the one who played the Beatles' first song.
Right. And was Georgie Woods a disc jockey over there? I think he was more Philadelphia. But what a network of disc jockeys that ushered the music to us.
Oh, my God. Absolutely. We've got a couple great artists who listen to Coast as often as they can. Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top and John Fogerty. And great guys.
Yeah, and they're very roots, driven, artists and performers. And their lives began, on the AM radio dial as kids and as fans, and look how they were ushered into the world, too.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some artists that are not with us right now. Johnny Cash, what's happening there?
Well, it's September 3rd marked the 20th anniversary of Johnny Cash's physical passing. It's been 20 years.
That long already?
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. I have a bond with Johnny partially because we share a February 26th, date of birth, and maybe I saw him in June 25, 30 times over, 40 or 50 years. But Johnny Cash, there's a book coming out in November, A Life in Lyrics, and starting very soon and going into next year, there's an estate authorized touring exhibition of Johnny Cash, like the Johnny Cash Concert Experience, which his son John Carter Cash is very involved in. That's touring all over the United States, where you hear Johnny's music. There are excerpts from his television program, and so it's not an oldies but goodies kind of show. It's more of an event and a tribute and a salute to Johnny. But he's actually involved as far as products and recordings and videotapes. So Johnny continues. The records keep going. His impact is still there, and it's to me he was always like a voice of America. It still resonates to me.
I will always remember when he was at Folsom Prison. What an event!
I have 3 different configurations of the Live from Folsom Prison album, and you start seeing people like Johnny Cash. Initially they're on TV or you see them touring, and then there's documentaries, or in the case of Johnny Cash, there's Walk the Line theatrical movies, just like Elvis. All of a sudden there's biopics on Elvis. You're seeing the growth of this Southern music, much like Detroit, that reached global ears.
Oh, that is so true. It is so true. And I'll always remember Johnny Cash coming out going, "Hello, everybody, I'm Johnny Cash."
That's how it all started.
What a talent. I mean,
beautiful.
What caught him on? Because initially when you first hear him, he's kind of laid back. He's not like an Elvis, but he caught on. What sparked his career?
He had such drive and determination to get his music out there, and he was also guided by maybe some of the right people. Initially, Sam Phillips at Sun Records, and then ending up at Columbia Records and working with the producer Don Law. And he, what I always find interesting about Johnny Cash, and I've written a lot about him. There's a big article I've just posted on him on cavehollywood.com. I don't think people realize from late 1959 or 60 to 1966, Johnny Cash was based in Southern California, kind of living in the Ventura area, even had an office on Hollywood Boulevard. You don't really realize he did 6 years in Southern California. It wasn't always, Memphis or Nashville. And so he's coming in the heart of Hollywood or making records when he's living out here. And he was always like fighting for the underdog and having concerns about Native American rights. I mean, he's just part of the fabric of our world.
That is truly remarkable. I do the first Sunday of every month on Coast to Coast, Harvey, and I end the program with Disturbed with David the Diamond, the singer,
yes,
of singing Sounds of Silence. And that is so haunting. It gives me goosebumps every time I hear it.
And when we hear Johnny Cash, it might be I Walk the Line, or it might be A Boy Named Sue, or some of the other things. You actually stop for a minute when you are confronted hearing the voice, because there's this he's sort of like this guide. I don't know. I guess for me, when I'm 6, 7, or 8, and Johnny Cash is in the newspaper, and I realize, they used to list people's date of birth or where they lived, or sometimes their street addresses in the old newspapers. And when I realized that he had the same birthday as me, and
cool. Fats
Domino, I said, wow, who's Fats Domino? I got to invest in Johnny Cash. We're like February people. I even said that to Smokey Robinson. He said, hey, man, I said, both born in February, and he'd go 19th, and I'll go 26th. I know it's sort of a comical bond we have, but it brings people together. And so Johnny, this 20 years since he left us, it kind of shows you how quick life goes as well.
Absolutely. It's truly remarkable. One of my favorite Johnny Cash songs is "It Ain't Me, Babe." That's one of his classics.
Well, he did that at the Newport Folk Festival. It was a cover of a Bob Dylan song.
He's singing that with June, right?
Yes, and I saw him do it at the Troubadour one time in West Hollywood, and he brought a lot of people's songs forward. You know, he kind of exposed people like Chris Christopherson and popularized Bob Dylan. Plus, he was a very early supporter of Bob Dylan at Columbia Records when Bob Dylan was first on the label and his debut album didn't do very well. And Johnny really lobbied for the executives and the promotional people to really stick with this guy. And when Cash had his, Johnny Cash TV show on ABC between 69 and 71, Bob Dylan was the first guest on his TV series, and that stuff's all available like on a double DVD. I encourage people to check out the Johnny Cash Show DVD. It's just wonderful to see the kind of people that Johnny put on the show, from the Monkees to Ray Charles. I mean, just think about him and Buffy St. Marie. I mean, just giving forum to these kind of people. This is in 1969, and this is a pre-cable TV world. There's only 3 networks happening.
That's right.
Johnny brought people to our attention.
You're going to get a kick out of this. I met a couple months ago Paul Anka.
Well, where do you want to start? From Diana on down.
I mean, plus My Way. He wrote that for Frank Sinatra.
He sure did.
Just classic.
He is beyond a survivor. I think he's also overlooked in history. I've had some conversations years ago with him because people forget what a businessman he has been, whether it be artist management or starting as a teenager from Canada.
Yep.
And I also think I wasn't present, but when you're coming from Canada and you're Lebanese, right? Was he Lebanese, I think?
Yes, he sure was.
I'm not going to say there were inherent, odds against him, but he comes to Culver City or his first record label as a teenager, and he ends up being the songwriter. He's a teen idol initially with these wonderful "Put Your Head on My Shoulder," and then he becomes this Vegas icon, and he's still out there touring. And you realize, you know what, the guy has had a 65-year-old career. You know, when he started in the 50s, people always sort of looked at rock and roll and said, oh, it's a 2 or 3 year career maybe, go back to college, get a day job. And look at him 2/3 of a century later, just out there and doing it. And he has a very devoted fan base.
Oh, absolutely. And he's a class guy and a nice guy too, Harvey.
Yes.
When we come back after the break, let's talk a little bit about Wayne Newton. And how old is Mick Jagger?
80.
80 years old, and he's still singing. They're coming out with a new album in another month or two, aren't they?
In late October, and today they issued a single from this album. Rock and roll isn't just for kids anymore. There are grandfathers on stage performing it.
Doing their thing. We'll talk about some of that. Harvey Kubernick with us. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie along with Harvey Kubernick. Harvey, we've lost Tony Bennett, Jimmy Buffett, Robbie Robertson of the band. We've lost some great talent lately. You know, as we grow older, it's just a fact of life, and especially when we're dealing with public personalities. You know, if you were to go back 40, 50, or 60 years ago, and I know you were old enough to maybe know when Richie Valens and Buddy Holly died in that plane crash in 1959, or, of course, these reference points like John F. Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. These are our first memories of maybe, we'll call it celebrity deaths, and it's either through newspaper or maybe you saw it on the news or heard it on the radio. But in the case of people like Robbie Robertson and the people you mentioned, we now have like 50 and 60 years of cumulative media about these people. We kind of feel they're not part of the family, but we feel we know them because
We've seen them in concerts. We've seen them in documentaries. We have bought their recordings in so many different configurations. And with the internet and websites and things like that, there's such shared information about these people that they're at your fingertips or in your earbuds or something. And in the case of Robbie Robertson, my brother and I, Kenneth, wrote a book on the band. I first interviewed Robbie in 1976, and then in 2000, and then 2017. Now, I may have only met him 12 times, and did maybe 6 hours of tapings in a 45-year period. And I'd see him at restaurants or out with Jane Fonda at an art opening or something, and maybe I was an acquaintance at the most. But still, when I get the news of these people, and because my work is on the internet, Google, and there's just not one casual mention. There's 10 or 15 articles over 5 decades on this person, and I am not confronted. That's too harsh of a word, but I get the phone calls and the emails or in the market, and people say, "I'm sorry to hear about your friend Robbie's death." I don't really call him a friend, but they heard about Robbie Robertson partially through work I've done, or there's this association. And to me, it's really deep. I mean, it's a guy that wrote a song called "King Harvest Has Surely Come," and I always thought that was kind of cool, Harvey Harvest. But, these people are they're not just our record collection people, they're our travel companions. And, but they'd all would tell us to keep going and not have a pity party and acknowledge them, when possible. But it's happening not at an alarming rate. Rock and roll people, like jazz people or some of the country artists before, and classical, people are cutting records at 60, 70, and into their 80s now.
That's great.
We didn't really plan on this kind of world where these people are going toward 90-year birthdays and still around to either, run catalogs or still occasionally tour and stuff. Like Johnny Mathis is doing some live things, and I think he's 83 or 84.
Tom Jones, he's still out there.
And you know what? Let's get rid of this age thing. As far as thinking, oh, it's incredible he's out there at age 74. Well, some people make their best work artistically. Maybe this goes into the painting world. They do their best work toward the end of their lives, or the last fourth quarter, shall we say. And we should not lament that what's these people going out there? They're senior citizens touring. They're doing it for all of us.
Were you in shock when Elvis Presley died in 1977?
No, I wasn't. In fact, it's funny you say this. I saw Elvis Presley 5 or 6 times in concert, and most of the time I was writing for a UK music weekly called Melody Maker, which really had a readership of over 1 million people a week.
That's a lot then.
Yes, and I saw a couple of Elvis Presley concerts in 76 and 77, and I actually headlined an article, "The King Has Lost His Crown."
Oh, boy.
And it's out there on the internet, and I actually said, he was dropping the mic and slurring some words. It was adequate, but I actually said, somebody needs to put this guy in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
I just... Not because I have a health and sociology degree. It was quite evident. And this has nothing to do with weight gain and the sloppiness of the show and the repetition. He just did not look healthy. It's like if somebody in your family, if they're really sick, go see a doctor. And so when it happened, I was unhappy and in shock, because I was a huge Elvis fan. I just talked to Priscilla last month. I wrote the liner notes for the 68 Elvis Presley Comeback Special box set. But I knew that was somebody not doing well on stage. After I'd seen him so vibrant, like in 1970, I took 3 buses to see him at the Forum. I had to see Elvis Presley. And I wasn't in shock. I didn't expect it to happen, but you also say to yourself, where are the people around these people protecting these people? In the last year of his life, Elvis Presley, I think, did 118 shows, the most amount of shows in the last year of his life than before. So he was overworked, overtaxed, and to me it's, and I'm reminded of him every day because once again, of all the work I've done, I mean, next year is my 50th year as a professional journalist.
That's amazing.
And I don't deserve any awards or kudos. This is my calling. But, if you would have told me I'd put in a half a century and become a writer, I mean, you're just talking to a guy that could never get on the yearbook staff or write for the school newspapers or was just thwarted at every attempt to be heard. And through not perseverance or determination, I let the music guide me, and now I think all of us are benefiting from the work and myself and so many other people do. But my goal was to maybe write a book. I never thought there'd be 20, or maybe I remember I always wanted to see my name on the screen on Hollywood Boulevard at a big movie theater. It was never a dream. I wanted to see my name on the screen because I would go to the movies a lot in Hollywood. And now I'm in all these documentaries and meeting studio heads and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just sort of taking it in, and I just say, it's like Al Kaline, your baseball player in Detroit, who I know you liked, keep your eye on the ball.
Exactly. I remember this YouTube clip of Elvis singing "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" and he forgot the words. And it was just horribly sad and embarrassing.
So when I saw that happen in front of me at the Long Beach Arena, I said...
Was that where it happened? You were there?
Yeah. And listen, he wasn't stumbling around drunk. It was nothing like that. But I saw... Let's just say I saw him he was making some errors on stage, whether it be a teleprompter wasn't working or it just wasn't on. And I just said, wow, I could still shut my eyes, and there were moments where you heard his voice, because his voice was sort of there, but I just knew that was an unhealthy person on stage. In fact, I will always remember my parents went to see Elvis in Vegas, and my dad, Marshall, said, your guy Elvis is in the hospital. He canceled some shows. I said, what does the word cancel mean? I didn't know what that meant. And he said, yeah, we went to see him in Vegas, and we caught a show, and then he canceled his engagement for a few days. He's in the hospital. He's not doing well. And, this is... My parents were Vegas people, the Sands in the 50s and all that kind of stuff. But when your dad says to you, he's not doing well, that resonated. And then when I saw him, I go, whoa. And so I was shocked, but I wasn't surprised. But, he had it going on for so long, and I encourage people to, my favorite Elvis song happens to be If I Can Dream. Just an incredible tune, and vocally, when I would go to see him, there were times, I could never get a date to go see Elvis Presley with me. Girls, if it was Deep Purple, there'd be 5 girls calling me. He didn't, we're talking 70 to 75. He was kind of out of fashion with disco music being popular and the emergence of kind of punk and new wave music sort of coming around in 76 and 77. So I would take my friends, or the record label would give me tickets, and you'd be calling people at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Do you want to schlep out to Anaheim and see Elvis tonight? And 3 or 4 people would go, no. Now these same people, because I'm fortunate to still talk to people from elementary school, they all miss seeing Elvis Presley. They every year or two, they'll always say, you called me to go to see an Elvis concert, and I thought, he's a has-been.
Oh,
it's just
wow.
interesting how it all kind of works,
Absolutely. But I'll remember that clip, "Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight?" Then he forgot the words. And then he'd go, whoop, 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 whoop. But the audience never put him down.
No. He I know it sounds cliche. He had them in the palm of his hands, but Elvis was an extension of their collective soul. He also
it was their past as well.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a conversation. No, it was an email or something with the author Norman Mailer, and I was requesting permission on some usages, some words or something, and he said something like, "When you see a performer or a movie star, always remember you bring your own history to the concert hall or to the screen." When you see them, you bring your own history to that person or that band with you. It's a cemented glue of some sort.
Yep. Harvey, what about Wayne Newton?
It is so, there are no accidents, as Andrew Lou Goldham told me. 6 hours ago, I was in a recording studio with a wonderful guitarist arranger named Don Peake. He was the Everly Brothers' lead guitarist, 61 to 63. He's the rhythm guitarist on a lot of the Motown Jackson 5 stuff. He's actually the guitarist on Marvin Gaye's opening riff on Let's Get It On. And I'm doing an audio memoir history with Don, his life story. Like, he's had 60 years in the business. And at the session, he said, make sure to ask me about Wayne Newton and Donkashane. And I said, well, were you on the session? He said, that session was very important in my life and your life. Well, I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, I'm on the session. He was a hired guitarist. And Bobby Darin was overseeing the session sort of as an executive producer because it was on Capitol Records. And at the session, Bobby Darin comes up to Don and says, I want to do some more work with you. Come to my office. And he says to Don, I'm working with
a kid.
Yeah. He said I've got a tune by a guy named Tim Hardin, and I want to record it, and I want you to arrange it for me. And Don went into Gold Star Recording Studios, a legendary facility in Hollywood, and Don arranged Bobby Darin's If I Was a Carpenter. And that comes out of a Wayne Newton session that Bobby Darin oversaw.
How cool.
So, these are the connective tissue that I like to explore and bring to my readers and listeners. But when you mention, and Wayne Newton, again, people forget there must have been a 5 or 10 year period, and we're going back.
And he's still singing in Vegas.
And he was for 5 or 6 or 7 years maybe the top attraction in Vegas as far as revenue and income streams.
They call him Mr. Las Vegas.
Yes, and beautiful voice. Again, he's an entertainer. These people were entertainers. They were recording artists, but they were there to entertain you and take you away from your pain or add to the pleasure of life.
How old was Wayne Newton when he came out with Donkashane, his first song?
I think he was 16. He was a chubby teenager, as he used to say, and his voice had finally changed. But, he'd do that song on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it became a signature, tune for him. But, he had a wonderful tune called Dreams of the Everyday Housewife. Really nice song.
That was a classic. That's right.
Beautiful song. There's more to Wayne Newton than Donkashane, and he was also quite a successful businessman, too. Again, like Paul Anka, these people like them, they show up in the late 50s and early 60s, and here they are in 2023 still being booked.
Truly remarkable. Ed Sullivan did a great job introducing these emerging artists, didn't he?
Oh, we could do 2 hours on Ed Sullivan. I've written extensively about Ed Sullivan. There's a chapter in him in my book, Docs That Rock, Music That Matters. He gave platform to all kinds of music, and again, to some people, they seem to forget Ed Sullivan started in the TV show went from 1948 to 1971. There were a lot of artists and R&B figures and Little Anthony and Dr. Jive. There were many jazz and rhythm and blues artists on the Ed Sullivan Show years before the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan. In fact, February of next year marks the 60th anniversary of the Beatles' debut on the Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's a shanda.
He should be. I mean, he was stiff as a board on television, but that number one rated Sunday night show, everybody watched it all the time, Harvey.
And again, context is king. There are 3 television channels then.
At that time.
NBC, CBS, or ABC. He's got a Sunday night 8 o'clock slot. And, sure, the caricature of him being an uncomfortable host has sort of shadowed his persona. That guy was a newspaper columnist.
And was well read. Harv, we'll talk more and we'll take calls when we come right back. This is a really big show.